the last days of the nation of Israel during the 1st century A.D. Jesus, as he's talking to his disciples in the 24th chapter of Matthew, no doubt he's been teaching them over a period of time, and they've been listening to his ministry, and he's been talking about the kingdom of heaven. He's been talking about the last days and using those terms, and they come to him and they ask him, well, tell us about the last days. You know, what is about the end of the world and of your coming? You keep talking about you're going to return and you're coming, or whatever. Tell us about these days. And Jesus begins to speak to them the words that you find in the 24th chapter of Matthew, and he begins to talk about and use the term the last days. And he begins to tell them, as a matter of fact, he said the day is coming when the destruction of this country is going to be so complete that the most treasured building that we have, the most treasured thing we have, this beautiful temple that you're trying to show me, is going to be torn down, and it's going to be so complete that there won't even be one stone left upon another. And they were fascinated. How could that be? How could that be? How could this actually be? For these people he was talking about, the people he was speaking to, you can take most of the prophecies given by Christ have a parallel. They occurred in 70 A.D. The persecution, the destruction of Jerusalem, all these things took place. That's why a lot of people say that the last days took place in 70 A.D. and all the prophecies were fulfilled. Now, I know that that's not so. For a lot of reasons. I'm not going to go into it, but I know that's not so. But a lot of them did. So for that group of people, especially the 12 disciples who were listening to Jesus, the last days were right around the corners for these people. And they came. I had a verse of Scripture here. It was in, I'm going to see if I can find it. I usually don't do this. I can't find it. I had it marked on another piece of paper, but I took it out of my book. But Jesus, in telling these disciples, like I say, he was prophesying to them of their last days, and they did take place for them. Now, let's talk about the last days. That's two time periods. The last days is also spoken in Scripture about a period of time that started on the day of Pentecost and ends in the rapture. Then we go into specific time, which is the 7 years of tribulation and the 1,000-year reign of Christ. But this undetermined period of time is called the last days. And they've been going on for close to 2,000 years. It's the last period or dispensation of time, from Pentecost to the rapture. It's a long period of time. We don't know how long it's going to be. It's still going on right now. And then there's one other, and this is what's important for us today. There's another period of time called the last days. This has to do with the generation of people who will be living when the Lord returns. These people are truly living in the last days. And I'll tell you something, I believe that's our generation. I believe that we're the generation of people right now who are living in the days immediately preceding the return of Jesus Christ. One of the greatest Bible prophecy teachers of all time, Hal Lindsey. If you ever read his, he believes it. As a matter of fact, Brother Hal Lindsey made a mistake one time, and he admits he did, trying to prophesy the year that the Lord would return based on Israel becoming a nation. And this verse of Scripture that says, this is in Mark 13:30, it's found other places, but it says this. Jesus said, "Verily I say unto you, that this generation shall not pass till all things be done." And he was specifically talking about the end time events. Well, Hal Lindsey took that and went back to 1948, May of 1948, and he looked at the generation. First is 30 years, and it didn't come to pass, but then he said probably it was 40, and it still didn't come to pass. And then he admitted he made a bad mistake and would never do that again, trying to predict the day, because no man knows. And he quoted the Scripture himself, no man knows. But here's what Jesus says, "Verily I say unto you, that this generation shall not pass till all things be done." Now that's got to be the last day generation. And I believe that we're living in that generation for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons, and I'm going to show from Scripture tonight, is the signs. We can't talk about the last days and preparing for the Lord's come and perilous times without talking about the signs. Because that's how we know that we're living in the last days, in these perilous times. See, 2 Timothy 3:1 says this, "For this know also, that in the last days," notice the word the last days, perilous times shall come. This was the great Apostle Paul, as he was writing to his young understudy, Timothy, a young minister in the gospel, who was suffering some hardship and some persecution, and no doubt having a hard time getting established in the ministry. Paul was warning him about a lot of things, and he told him, he said, Timothy, there's one thing, he said, you need to know this. He said, this know also. He said, I've told you a lot of other things, but he said, this know also, that in the last days, perilous times shall come. Well, like I say, I believe that we've entered into those last days already. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make a statement, and this is my belief. I not only believe that we are living in the last days, I believe that most of the last days are used up. That generation, a generation can be a pretty good time span. Jesus said the generation that saw these things come to pass and experienced these things that I'm going to talk about in a minute, the signs, he said, that's the generation that'll know. That generation, you may have one or two people pass away, but by and large, that generation will still be intact, he said, until all things be done, that they'd all be done. All the scriptures, according to the end times, is going to be fulfilled. And I believe that whatever time period that was, how much you want to call a generation, I believe that we've used up most of the days. I believe, folks, I believe that it could just be months before the Lord comes. Now, I know I made a point last week of talking about the man Harold Camping, who predicted the Lord was going to come, that Jesus would turn and the end of the world would begin. Well, it didn't happen. But the point I made last week was that was one of the greatest fulfillment of Scriptures that I've ever seen. In that the world scoffed at the idea, not that the man was wrong, but that it could ever take place anyway. Did you hear one single person anywhere say, well, this man is probably wrong because of the fact that no man knows the day or the hour? But the Lord could come on that day, and if he don't come on that day, you better be looking for him on the next day. If he don't come on May the 21st, look for him on May the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, because the Lord is coming soon. Did you hear anybody do that? All I heard was scoffers in the news media and everywhere. Everybody making fun. They were people having parties because they knew it was going to take place. People saying that they were going to have steak dinners and drink a beer. I heard a news commentator say, well, tonight after 6 o'clock, said, I'm going to cook me a big steak and drink me a beer. Because he was so sure it wasn't going to happen. Scoffers. And that's what Peter said would take place. I'll read that scripture here in a little bit in 2 Peter. Peter said that there were scoffers would come, walking after their own lust. Ask him, well, where's the promise? You promised he's going to come. Where's he at? We've not seen him. Mom and Dad said that, and everybody else has said that, and we still don't see it. You know what they're saying? It's not going to happen. But, folks, it is going to happen. A fulfillment. Well, if we are living in the last days, and I'm going to go over a few of the signs in a minute to show that we are from the Bible, but you don't have to take my word from it. If these are the last days, then what did the Scripture say? We are living in perilous times. Now I want to talk a minute about perilous, the word perilous. The word that was used in the Bible, or that the King James interpreters interpreted from the original, I can't even pronounce the word, but the word hasn't changed meaning since they used it a couple of hundred years ago. The word that they picked, perilous, the word perilous hasn't changed meanings over time. It still has the same meaning today as it did when the King James expositors put this in the Bible for us. They used the word perilous times. Perilous times. My definition of perilous times is this. You find yourself in a life-threatening situation. You may live, you may die, but the outcome is not certain. That's a perilous time. One of the most perilous situations that I ever saw, I saw on TV the other night. This was it was on the History Channel, and the name of the program was Gettysburg. Anybody ever watch that? 2 armies in fields around Gettysburg with those big 50 caliber guns aimed at one another, and they walk across those fields and fire at one another. And there were so many soldiers laying on the ground, the commentator says, in the actual battle that they had to walk over top of the soldiers to get to where they was going, but they kept marching and firing just as soon as they could load, and people falling, and those big cannons cut them to pieces. Now you talk about a perilous time. What if you was that soldier walking across that battlefield, and you seen those big guns and those sharpshooters, they showed up on the hill shooting down on those Confederate soldiers, and them trying to march up a hill. They didn't even have cannons, and them Union soldiers opening them, they had 12 big cannons sitting on that hill firing down on them. Now, that's a life-threatening situation. You're walking across that field. People are falling on around you. You're walking on your fellow soldiers. You don't know where you're going to live or die. That would be a perilous situation. A sailor at sea, like the Apostle Paul was at one time, where he went so many days and nights and they never saw the sun, and they were throwing everything overboard, and the captain and everybody was they were ready to kill the prisoners because they were just totally sure that this ship was going down. That is a perilous situation, life-threatening. You don't know whether you're going to live or die. These people who were in tornadoes a few weeks ago, and they hear the alarm, and they see bad weather coming. 500 and some people just in a short period of a few months here losing their lives in these tornadoes. No, you're right in the middle of one. All at once you're not ready, but all at once you hear it outside your house, and the house starts coming apart. You don't know where you're going to live or die. Dangerous situation, life-threatening. The outcome is not certain for you. That is what the meaning. That's the meaning of the word perilous. And we live in perilous times.